Good morning. Our scripture reading comes from Isaiah chapter 2, verses 3 and 4. And many people shall go and say, Come ye, and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, and he will teach us of his ways, and we will walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. And he shall judge among the nations, and shall rebuke many people. And they shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nations, neither shall they learn war anymore. Good morning. Thank you for the beautiful sharing of talents and the gifts. That was outstanding. Thank you very much. Happy Mother's Day. It's not just mothers, though. It's also grandmothers, and even aunts tie into that. There's an Irish proverb that goes something like this: a man loves his sweetheart the most, his wife the best, but his mother the longest. Now, I don't know how true any of that is, but I think there may be some wisdom there. If a lot of my mom's friends say that, if you see me, you see my mom. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. There's only one thing that I really have at odds with my mom, and I guess that would be when she made my sister and myself co-executors on her will. I'm going to talk with her about that because that ended up being quite an experience. Also, I'd like to call to your recollection today that today is Happy Jerusalem Day. It's been 51 years since the 1967 Six-Day War. 20 years from the day when Israel was called to return to their homeland, and three nations rose up to wipe them off the face of the earth. And a miraculous victory was won. And for the first time since 70 A.D., Israelis could walk up to the Western Wall, could walk up to the Temple Mount, could walk into the old city and be part of a unified city for the first time since Rome destroyed the Second Temple. We're watching prophecy play out right under our nose, folks. Kim and I have something of an announcement. As we were, voted on in public, we feel it's appropriate to state this in public. We will be withdrawing our membership and going to Waldo. One of my buddies from New Orleans has resurfaced and re-engaged, and we think that it's going to be more appropriate for us to help him in his ministry. And just so there's no misunderstanding, we cannot thank you enough for the love that y'all share with us. And we are indeed a part of this family. But we feel that just as we've left hearth and home and gathered to this part of the country, we also have to remove ourselves from this family for a short while and go help others. So I hope that as this sermon progresses, that tends to make sense and there's a confirming spirit. And I thank you for there being no applause. But we truly love y'all. Thank y'all. Y'all have really put us back together, and we are most appreciative. I'm going to be a little selfish today, like that's unusual, but I want to go on record of bearing my testimony of this restoration and this movement and how that's true. And I'm going to give you some of the perspectives, or my perspective on some of the things that have happened in my life, our life together. And I hope that, and I'm quite sure that everybody in this room could stand up and share something just as similar. So I hope you don't mind indulging me for just a few moments. To give you a little background, I am fourth generation RLDS. It is of such note that I'm even in this body because my great-great-grandmother is noted in the Alabama State Archives of her joining this church early on. I started doing some research about, why and how that happened. And apparently around 1836, when the elders were sent out 2 by 2 from Kirtland to go to the Lamanites, they ended up down in Baldwin County, Alabama, on the Gulf. There's obviously a pretty good size Creek and Choctaw population there, of which I'm a distant part of. And we came into the church then through my great-great-grandmother converting to the RLDS church. My father raised us up. I felt like, Nephi it talks about, having been born of goodly parents. And there I was taught somewhat in the learning of my father. And just to note that, the very first chiasm appears in the Book of Mormon right there. The very first paragraph, the first chiasm shows up, which obviously is a Hebrew, poetry form. So there's this Hebrew nature throughout this whole thing. And I was talking about how, ants figure into this. As a kid growing up, my dad's older sister would always be on him. Pat, you getting little Pat to church enough? And she was always on him. And it was just wonderful to see this play and the memories that we have of going to church in that section. I know we take it for granted here that there's just a smorgasbord of congregations here. Well, where I'm from, at that time, there were only 2 churches in the whole state. One was in Baldwin County on the eastern side of Mobile Bay, and the other one was in Mobile, which is on the western side of Mobile Bay. And that congregation was large enough to be like a district unto itself, if I'm not mistaken. But since my dad was from Baldwin County, we usually went to Bamanette when we attended church. And it was wonderful, absolutely wonderful. Which leads me to my next point, our next little item here. And that is, I'd like a show of hands of how many people believe they were gathered to this part of the country during their lifetime or their parents' lifetime. It's about 50%. That's pretty incredible. The gathering is going on, folks. Recorded in Matthew 23, 36 through 37. Then Jesus began to weep over Jerusalem, saying, O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, ye who will kill the prophets and stone them who are sent unto you, how often would I have gathered your children together, even as a hen gathers her chickens under her wings, and ye would not. And then in 3 Nephi, chapter 9, 52 to 54, and ye shall be in the midst of them, who shall be many, and ye shall be among them as a lion among the beasts of the forests, and as a young lion among the flocks of sheep, who, if he goeth through, both treadeth down and teareth in pieces, and none can deliver. Thy hands shall be lifted up upon thine adversaries, and all thine enemies shall be cut off. And I will gather my people together, as a man gathereth his sheaves into the floor. For I will make my people with whom the Father hath covenanted. Yea, I will make thy horn iron, and I will make thy hooves brass. So we have a promise of the gathering. I testify that it is actually happening. This is Joseph's land. And that raises some dichotomies for us that we're going to need to work through, but make no doubt, this is Joseph's land. As a kid growing up, this place was never on my radar at all. I was something of a black sheep in the church. If I was in church maybe 2 times a month, that was a red letter month. I was usually involved in athletics, and my weekends were usually spent getting over the truck that just hit me. But, if you mentioned Graceland to me when I was a kid, to me, you were talking about Elvis Presley's home. I had no idea about, Graceland University being attached with this body. But things began to change. Like I said, as a child, my dad made sure that I had the 3 standard books and just pour over them, read them, and just consume them. As a sophomore at Auburn, my athletic career came to an end. I had knee surgery, and through that fire and test of character, I was shown to be very lacking, and I went into absolute, full-blown, open rebellion against everything I know to be true. And he let me. He put his fingerprint on me with the pressure that was absolutely, perfectly required and balanced to go exactly where it needed to go and no further. After several incidences, including 2 single-car accidents, I woke up. And I knew I was at rock bottom. And I looked across my room, and I saw the 3 standard books kind of collecting dust on a shelf. I walked over and picked up the Doctrine and Covenants and just turned wherever it opened and read. Knowing that I was currently living out Mosiah, because I was a natural man, and I allowed him full sway. And I read section 1. First thing out of the chute. And the rebellious shall be pierced with much sorrow, for their iniquities shall be spoken upon the housetops, and their secret acts shall be revealed. I lived that, and that literally took place. Absolutely, literally took place. I had driven my car down in a ditch, and it was in the shop, so I had to borrow another buddy's car. Some of my fraternity brothers were literally working on the roof of our home, and we're talking about what was actually taking place in my life. Section 1 literally came to pass. And I read that and just wept. And then Mosiah kicks in. Mosiah 1:120. But if he yields to the enticings of the Holy Spirit, and putteth off the natural man, and becometh a saint through the atonement of Christ the Lord, and becometh as a child, submissive, meek, humble, patient, full of love, willing to submit to all things which the Lord seeth fit to inflict upon him, even as a child doth submit to his father. That is the lesson that I was going to learn. Not that I've done any of it, but at least I now have this goal set before me. When I graduated Auburn, there were 2 places for accountants to be. One was Houston, and the other was New Orleans, Louisiana. I had uncles that lived in both places, and I swore I will never, ever be in New Orleans, ever. 2 years later, I'm there, and I will be there for 5 years, working on the West Bank in a CPA firm. Lot of spiritual challenges, as you can imagine. But through it all, and I would like to think because of some of it, you find out what's really important to you. For the first time in my life, the gift of being able to see or read one scripture in one book and instantly know how to cross-reference it was opened up to me for the first time. So as there were things that were taking place, there were other things of greater value taking place as well. As my time in Louisiana started to grow short, and by the way, that's where I met Jimmy Lumiere, the person that I was talking about earlier. he and I used to hold cottage meetings together in New Orleans for different people. And we just developed an interesting bond, as you'll see in just a minute. But as my time in New Orleans was coming to a close, I had a lease that was coming up, and several folks had said, Pat, if you're ever in the market for a roommate, let me know. That it would be just perfect. So I ran those traps, and Pat, I just signed a lease 2 months ago. Already got it all taken care of. I heard that like 3 or 4 times. So the thought occurred to me, it's apparent that I'm going to be out of New Orleans. And the question is, do I go to Mobile, where I'd have a natural practice, or do I go to Independence? An out of the blue thought. So I prayed about it, and Independence just seemed to be the thing. So I said, okay, I'm going to Independence. And the moment I thought that, it's like this weight was lifted off of me. So I went into my immediate supervisor and said, Keith, I need to speak with the senior partners in the conference room if you don't mind. Yeah, Pat, what do you need? I said, well, I need to speak with the partners in the conference room. Pat, what do you need? I said, well, I need to tender my resignation. Excuse me? Is there something we've done? Is there something we can do? And I just went, no, nothing like that. I said, I just have this offer of education, and I've really got to take it up. Which wasn't entirely true. I had applied to law school but hadn't got accepted yet, but I thought it was going to take place. Anyway, he looked at me and said, Pat, you're leaving because of your church, aren't you? And I said, yeah, pretty much. That's exactly right. He said, Pat, your family, we will do and write any recommendation you need. We will help and assist you in anything we can do. Please feel free to let us know. I mean, I was there when their kids were born, watched their house for them, did all kinds of stuff. They invited me over for monthly crab boils and everything at their home. And it was just, just part of the family, just the way it was. So I don't have a job. I don't have a place to live. All I know is in 2 weeks, I'm heading to Independence. One of the priesthood members, Jerry Gaither, called me up and said, Pat, I understand you're thinking about going to Independence. I said, not only thinking, I'm pretty much into that mode. And this was like day 3 after this decision had been made. And he said, I think I know somebody that might have some property for you. You might want to give him a call. Well, he ended up introducing me to Jim Rogers out of Jackson, Mississippi. So I gave him a call. He was the president of the Louisiana, Mississippi state. And he said, Pat, you won't believe this, but I have some property opening up the very day you're due in. Well, I like that. I'll take that. And it was absolutely wonderful. So I had a place to live. So the time came, and I remember driving through the night to get up here, packed everything in a U-Haul that would fit, and whatever didn't fit in the U-Haul, I gave to Jerry's group home. So, they got a bunch of furniture and stuff. And I got up here, and I hit town. I mean, just like I said, just driving straight through the night. And I got up here, and I hit town coming on I-70. I can still remember a full moon in front of me setting and a rising sun behind me. And I hit Nolan Road, and I went to there used to be a little gas station at 39th and Nolan. It's now a CVS pharmacy, and I stopped there to get a city map. You didn't have GPSs, didn't have smartphones back then, folks. You had folding paper, and you check out where you were. I know it's a skill that few possess today, but I was looking for a folding map, and they had just sold all of them out. They were all gone. And it was like 6 in the morning. So I figured, Nolan Road looked like a pretty good sized road, so let's just keep heading north, and something's got to happen. So I made it to the auditorium, and still kind of misty and foggy on the thing, and I just got out and said a quick prayer. Father, thank you for seeing me home. Right about that time, finished my prayer, and I looked across the way, and there used to be an obelisk over on the temple lot that was put up by the Church of Christ. And there was a gentleman praying by that, so I waited for him to finish. I said, my name's Pat Baggette. I just, gathered in. I don't know where I am, but I know that I have a house or something, rental home on West College. Can you tell me where that is? Oh, sure, not a problem. Go 3 blocks to the north on River, take a left, and you'll be 3 blocks away from where you're supposed to be. So the moment I needed information, it's provided. So we got there and started unpacking. Actually, I took a little nap, believe it or not, and then got up and started unpacking, and I found out Ronald Reagan was in town. So I thought, well, this is wonderful. This is, for me, a real good sign. I had met Ronald Reagan in 1982 in Jackson, Mississippi at the Republican convention, and for him to be here that day was just great, and it was just a wonderful thing. So got unpacked, started walking around, just looking around, and I came back, and as I'm pulling in, I shut the car door, and I hear this, Pat Baggette, what are you doing here? Talk about having your heart get caught up in your throat. It's like, who in the world knows that I'm here? I look over, and it's Jimmy Lumiere. He's my next door neighbor. Had no idea. So that was just an interesting deal. So that week, I go up to the auditorium, and I meet Thelma Morgan. And that's right, isn't it? She asked me what I was doing. I said, I'm recently gathered in, have no idea, where I'm supposed to be or what's going on. I have some goals, obviously, but, she said, well, we'd like to be a tour guide. I said, ma'am, you don't understand. I got to find a position. That's nice. How about a volunteer tour guide on the weekends? Sure, we'll do that. So the first week I'm here, I get to be a volunteer tour guide at the auditorium. The second week I'm here, I get a job with the oldest CPA firm in the state of Missouri with a 27% raise over what I was making in New Orleans, and it's a lot less inexpensive to live here. And I met Kim, who became a volunteer tour guide just about the same time. So it was interesting, to say the least. So we get married, go to law school, and a lot of folks have no idea what they're going to write their thesis on, to prove that you can, speak the King's English. Well, I knew exactly what I was going to do. My deal was to divest the RLDS Church of every red penny they ever thought they'd even think about getting. So I talked with my torch professor, Jack Balkin, and I said, Jack, this is the deal. He said, well, tell me what your theory is. And I said, my theory is, does the church hold its property in trust for its membership such that if there should ever be a schism, that you can divest the church of its property? He just sat back and said, Pat, that's an interesting question. Before we get too far down this path, go look up this case, Wolf v. Jones, handed down by the United States Supreme Court in 1979. Just knew it off the cuff. And I just went, okay, we'll do that. So I shagged to the library and find the reporters and start looking, and I was like, oh, man, really? And it talks about basically that there's a hierarchical form of the church, and they vote, and the church is all, noticed up, and the function is right and proper, then whatever the church votes on is okay. If the church is noticed up and they vote to become the church of Satanism, then that's what they are, and you can't do anything about it. So that's what I was sitting here dealing with. The interesting thing about that whole deal is when my mom passed and we had to go to clear her estate out. She had some property in Butler County, and I went to my grandfather, family attorney, little fellow about this tall, probably weighed 85 pounds soaking wet. Just a real neat fellow, Mr. Williams. And I walked into his office, and his office is just absolutely blank. There's nothing on the wall except for one little piece of paper. I'm sitting there looking at it. He said, I'll be right back in a second. Can you wait? Yes, sir. He comes back in and says, okay, now how may I help you? I said, well, you were my grandfather's attorney, and you're my mom's attorney, and need some help cleaning up some property. And before we get started, when you argued with the United States Supreme Court, did you wear a morning coat? He said, yes, I did. He said, I've been 4 times, and I've won all of them. And I went, you're kidding me. He said, no. As a matter of fact, he said, this is in Little Greenville, Alabama. He said, I am the national representative, the national attorney for the Presbyterian Church. And he gave me just the history of the Presbyterian Church in like 3 minutes from, prior to the War of Northern Aggression on. It was just incredible. Anyway, I was sitting there going, and I was listening to him talk, and it just clicked. And I was saying, Presbyterian Church. He said, absolutely. I said, you argued Wolf v. Jones. He said, and won. And I went, oh my gosh, this symmetry, you just find symmetry. And I look for that, no ragged edges. And when you see symmetry like that, that moment of synchronicity, it's just beautiful. So, where was I? But it was just an interesting thing. So we get out of school, get out of law school, we start having kids. Blessing upon blessing. And then our life changed when our son was just about 3 years old, firstborn. January 1 of 1993, our son went into status epilepticus, and that's where one seizure overlays another. And basically, if you don't get it stopped, it'll burn your brain up. And it was just a story of absolute miracles. The elders show up. I mean, we get to the hospital literally 5 minutes before one of the largest ice storms that has hit Kansas City in quite some time. Everything else after that stopped. I remember we had a prayer, and we gave our son back that night. Father, we want him. But if you need him, do what you must. But we want him. The elders show up the next morning, administer to him. And while we're there, we come in contact with another family whose son has been there just before Thanksgiving, and they're losing him. He's on a feeding tube, and he's starting not to respond. And he's slipping away. And the elders administer to him, and from that moment, he levels off and starts coming back. And we watch the healing that was taking place in this family that had been ripped apart on top of all this. And we proceed to continue in these blessings that take place. 2013, we go to the missionary reunion. I'm sure you've heard of some of this from us in the past. Anyway, Trey was a near drowning victim at the missionary reunion. And before we went, we had been praying for, I've been praying for the ministry of the one of the three. It's a stupid prayer, by the way. Be very careful when you want to pray that one. Kim had been wanting to know if we were in the right place, if the restoration was actually functioning the way it's supposed to, and are we in the right place, and give us that testimony. As a kid, I grew up hearing my father talk about basically one of the three showing up at my grandmother's home one day, came in the picket fence, walked up, and asked if there's any work that could be done for a meal. And my grandmother said, no, there's not, but come on in. So she fed him, and then while they were, getting that done, she looked at my grandfather and said, Jesse, why don't you take this man down to the second-hand store and get him a coat because winter's coming on. So grandfather heads down there with the gentleman to get him a coat, and they come back, and she's got a box lunch ready for him to take with him as he leaves. And, thank you, obviously. And he started to turn and walk down the way. And the moment he got to the gate, he turned around and said, "Thank you. And because of the kindness you've shown me today, your family will never go hungry." And my dad has said that, there were times when my mom and he were down to their last nickel, and some mustering out pay from the Navy would show up. He said just things would happen like that. In 2003, right after Trey had his episode, my father was diagnosed with lung cancer. And we had kind of been estranged for probably 5 years, easy, almost 10, and barely talked with one another until probably the last year of his life. And then when the moment I heard that, I called one of the restoration branches in Mobile and asked if they could go and administer to my father. And I told them the story about this one from when he was a little kid. Now, my father was a Navy corpsman. He served with the Marines in Korea, and I never saw the man cry, ever. I saw him burn the bottom of his feet on hot coals such that, blisters formed, and they would hang off the bottom of his feet about a half an inch. No whimpering. Just amazing. But the gentleman called me and said, "Pat, I relayed the story of one of the 3 coming to you, and your father cried and relayed some other information to me, and I'll share that with you now." And that was amazing. And he passed shortly thereafter. And I remember that was one of the first funerals I had ever gotten to participate in. And afterwards, my mom sidled up to me and put her arm in mine, and we walked back to the car. And she said, "Did you hear that?" And I said, "What?" She said, "Did you hear the train, the 3 o'clock train?" I said, "Yeah, that was kind of odd. That's not supposed to take place right now. It's not supposed to run through here." She said, "Shorty," my dad's mom, always talked about how your father couldn't go to sleep until the 10 o'clock train had gone by." Once again, the symmetry. But what I didn't mention, and I meant to, was when our son had gone through and was at the gravest moment of his life, the person working on him looked up and looked into the eyes of this man that were standing there. She said it was like looking into a laser. She said that she'd never seen such intensity. She had gone through a protocol 3 times and nothing, because he was choking. And out of nowhere, she just said a quick prayer after looking in that man's eyes. And she stuck her hand down my son's throat, and nothing happened. And then she did it again, and he gagged and started his heart again. And I just looked and I went, "Oh my gosh, what made you do that? You're trained never, ever do that." And she broke protocol. And she just said, "I just asked the Lord to use my hands. Help me." And we looked for, everybody thought that, this being the 70s reunion, that this was Juan Reyes that was coming over to help administer to him. And they had a meeting that night. Our son was life flighted to Des Moines. We followed on, and there's interesting stories there. But what we found was that it wasn't Juan Reyes. They asked the Spanish-speaking section, did they know who it was? No. They asked the staff, did they know? No. Did you have any people working? No. And Jennifer Warnock bore her testimony about how she happened to be on a closed campus in a closed pool as an emergency room nurse, there to take care of our son the moment we needed him, and to respond with her life to the leanings of the Spirit. think one of the guys came up and confirmed that it was one of the three that was there, and we were told that we should expect this ministry to become much more frequent and see it in much more power. So, there's a work here that we have been granted participation in. As a kid in high school, I thought I was born 100 years too late. In college, I thought I was born 50 years too late. And then all of a sudden, I start saying, we are put here in the precise moment we're supposed to be here. We have this blessing, and all of creation is stretched out just for us to bring this ministry to untold thousands. Because the gathering is taking place, folks, and we get to participate. As the Lord spoke unto Moses, is recorded in section 22. And the Lord God spake unto Moses, saying, the heavens, they are many, and they cannot be numbered unto man, but they are numbered unto me, for they are mine. And as one earth shall pass away, and the heavens thereof, even so shall another come. And there is no end to my works, neither to my words, for this is my work and my glory, to bring to pass the immortality and eternal life of man. May the good Lord bless us as we continue his work.